If you want to learn about something, you probably have to do some research to find information about it. You might need to do some research for school, and you will have to do research if you study at college or university. I am not going to teach you how to really do research in your chosen field, as you will be taught that from college onwards. But I will give some general tips that will help you get started. You might benefit from these tips also if it's been a long time since you went to college and or haven't done any research in a long time, or ever. Research is not just for academic scholars. It's something everyone should do in their everyday lives, at least a little, and especially about the things that are most important to them. That personal interest is good in that it motivates you to look for information even if it takes some time. If you are working on a thesis, it's good to have that passion to drive you, so that it doesn't feel like tedious work. Doing research on what you are passionate about can feel like the best thing ever. But also, if you have strong beliefs about what you are doing research on, you have to be careful to rein in your biases, as the easiest person to fool is yourself. And you may easily convince yourself that what you want to believe is the truth. Honest research requires intellectual honesty, testing your own beliefs and only accepting what you can rationally justify, discarding the rest, even if they were your beloved beliefs. That right there was my first and most important tip for doing research. These days, probably the first thing you do when you look something up is you Google it. There are many search engines, and it may be a good idea to use several, or even a meta search engine. If you don't know what that is, look it up. The second thing immediately follows from the first, as the search result is likely to include a Wikipedia article. So you check out what Wikipedia has to say about the subject. Especially when Wikipedia was new, people kept warning about using it, but it actually is a pretty good encyclopedia, especially now that it cannot be edited quite as easily by just anyone as it used to. But even printed encyclopedias contain errors and biases, so you always have to think critically. When you use Wikipedia, you may wish to take a look at the article's editing history. Link to that is on the top right of the page. Also, be sure to heed any warnings posted on the Wikipedia page. They may be about lack of sources or other issues with the article. While the article text itself may be useful, it is, in my opinion, mostly useful as a reminder if you already have studied the subject. If the subject is not of great interest to you, the text itself might be enough for your purposes for now, but always try to remember your sources. If you learned something from a quick look at the Wikipedia page, or really any source, you should not put too much trust in that piece of information. Of more interest than the text itself in the Wikipedia article is the list of sources. The same actually applies to all articles and other sources you use. If you are doing actual research, it is a good idea to make a habit of looking at the listed sources, bibliography and links, and adding the most important of them to your own reading list. It's useful to get access to the most recent published works first, so you can check the bibliographies for other recent works, and possibly the most comprehensive bibliographies. I like to list the books I've already read on my website, and suggest you also do that or something similar. Include at least some notes about the contents of the book. If you want to list even articles and websites, do so by all means. For the thing you are actually doing research on, you should list in a file all the sources you have found, possibly with quotes and comments, including proper citations. You can add the quotes directly to, for example, the end of the text document you are writing, or you can have a separate file for the quotes. In either case, the point is to make it easy for you to later cut and paste the quote, once you know how to use it in the text you are writing. You can use it as a direct quote or explain it in your own words while citing the source. You can and should cite your sources even in online communications, such as a comment on social media. Doing so adds to your credibility, but more importantly, makes it more likely that you actually know what you are talking about. Besides Wikipedia and other websites you can find via search engines, there are also two kinds of professional online sources that can be easily accessed and used to look for sources: online bookstores and library catalogs. University libraries especially have good online search functions that can be very useful, but other libraries may be worth a try as well. University libraries are likely to also have advice for research on their websites. If you can go to a library in person, you may be able to ask the librarians there for help. At least in Finland, university libraries are accessible to anyone, not just those working or studying at the university, so you can even get a library card there. Universities are also useful in that they probably have their curricula online, so if you are interested in a subject taught at a university, you can see what books are required reading for the courses on that subject. You can then look for those books at the library or through second-hand bookstores, many of which are also available online. Online bookstores also have useful search functions. The books available through them, just like in libraries, have keywords and descriptions, and even the customer reviews they usually like to enable may be useful sometimes. It may even be possible to access the necessary pages of the book through the online bookstore without having to buy the book. While I recommend not buying books through Amazon, if you can avoid it, they have a useful recommendation system that you can use to find books about the things you are interested in. Instead of buying them, you should see if you can get them through a library. Even if a library doesn't have the book you want, they may be able to get it for you, although that can sometimes be expensive. Although when doing research, I generally still prefer reading printed books. Digital books are nice because you don't need to go through the trouble of physically retrieving and returning the book, and you may be able to easily copy bits of the text for quotations. You can also use a search function to look for something in the book. Even printed books may include a useful index at the end of the book, though. For free access to academic papers and such, you can try Academia.edu or perhaps some legally more questionable sites like Sci-Hub. For philosophical materials, go to PhilPapers. Other similar sites exist. If there is one you'd like to recommend, let me know in the comments below. If during your research, or really at any time, you come across what seems like an extraordinary claim about a scientific study, you can check out the Retraction Watch website to see if the article with the sensational result has been retracted already. That happens, you know. For news sources, there are sites and apps like Ground News, for example, that collate published articles, and some of them also rate their credibility. You can use them to see how a thing or an event of interest to you was reported, but of course you have to pay to be able to use them. Especially if you are just doing research for school, You will probably be relying on just online sources, such as online versions of newspapers and other websites, or possibly videos. Here are some critical questions you need to ask when using them. This is mostly based on the materials published by Studio, although similar advice is available in many places. When was the piece published and/or edited? Sometimes very old news gets shared in social media because people forget to check the date, which is really important for the context of the piece. Who is credited as the author? Who is the publisher? The site should have at least the publisher's information easily available. Some publishers may be more or less obviously merely propagandists for certain authoritarian governments or corporations. What economic interests are connected to the source? Are the author and publisher forthcoming with this information? Is the source applying journalistic criteria? Do they admit mistakes and make corrections? They may be guilty of false balance or very one-sided reporting, but either may be difficult to assess, as sometimes there really is no significant other side to the story, even if some people claim otherwise. In other cases, there may be more than two important sides to consider. Does the source seem credible on the surface? For example, is the tone neutral or very emotional? Does the text look professional in terms of the language used, spelling and grammar? Is the language very difficult to comprehend because a lot of strange technical jargon is used? If you feel affected by the article, or especially a video, or even something you see on TV news, that may be a red flag. The use of sounds and music can be used to influence you inconspicuously. Especially if there are adverts on the site, there is a possibility that they use so-called clickbaits in the titles. They may be misleading or exaggerated, and they typically do not actually contain any useful information, instead just promising some shocking revelation if you click to see what the information is. A site using a lot of clickbaits is unlikely to be trustworthy. Are the claims in the source consistent with the scientific consensus? They may claim so themselves, but that may itself be a lie. For example, deniers of anthropogenic climate change have used this tactic. You can cross-check such information and even ask your teacher or any other expert you know if you are studying somewhere. Use multiple sources, if possible, to check for differences in how the subject is reported or discussed. Writing is the best form of thinking. By writing, you expand your consciousness and especially your memory, both short and long term. Using a computer for writing is best for this, as you can always copy and paste, delete, rewrite and alter your text, especially by relocating text. If you wrote something that you later realize won't be needed in this paper, it might still be useful elsewhere. So perhaps you can copy it to another file for safekeeping. That said, writing things like lecture notes with a pencil on a paper may be more beneficial for learning. If you are writing an essay or an article for a course, it is important to start writing early. First, try to formulate your main research question and additional questions, for example, breaking the main question into its constituent parts. Even these basic questions may have to be discarded and replaced, but that's okay. It may be difficult to come up with a good research question when you know very little about the subject. So you may have to start with something far too broad, but you can narrow it down as your research moves along. Once you have some basic knowledge about the subject and research questions to start with, you should already start thinking of a disposition for your paper. That means planning a structure for it. The disposition is essentially a list of contents, just without the page numbers, because you are sketching the structure before you have the text. The list of contents is what you create, or at least update, at the very end of the writing process, when you have the correct page numbers. Again, the disposition you are sketching will likely not be the structure of your final paper, but that's just fine. Research will involve having to revamp your whole paper, perhaps even several times. Since you are not doing the research just for yourself, or even if you just want to learn about the subject yourself, you should write your text so that almost anyone with some basic understanding of the subject will be able to understand what you have written. When you can explain the thing to others, you can claim to understand it yourself. If you cannot explain it in fairly simple terms, you probably don't understand it. Of course, things tend to actually be complicated, so fairly simple means something like explaining it to someone who understands the basics of the field, not explaining it to a 5-year-old. That's all of my research tips for now. I hope they help. If you know some good advice I didn't mention here, let us all know in the comments below. Bye for now. If you wish to support my channel, please click thumbs up, subscribe and share my videos. Any comments on the videos would also be welcome.